Welcome to BBC News, broadcasting to viewers in North America and around the globe. My name is Nkem Ifejika. Our top stories. A few days after wrangling, the UN Security Council passes a resolution calling for a 30-day ceasefire across Syria. A list of 105 names of missing Nigerian girls is released by their parents following their suspected abduction by Boko Haram jihadists. Hello and welcome to BBC News. After days of deadlock, the UN Security Council has unanimously voted for an immediate 30-day ceasefire across Syria. It's hoped the truce will allow aid to reach areas including the rebel-held eastern Ghouta, where more than 500 civilians are said to have been killed in government airstrikes in the past week. The votes had been delayed repeatedly to avoid drawing a veto from Russia, which is an ally of the Syrian government. The French President Emmanuel Macron and the German Chancellor Angela Merkel will speak by phone on Sunday with the Russian President Vladimir Putin to push for the truce to take hold in the coming days. Nick Brandt reports.
The people of eastern Ghouta woke up this morning to continued aerial bombardment. And the news from New York that the Security Council remained deadlocked and still couldn't reach agreement on how to bring about even a temporary halt to the killing. Delay in Syria always brings more death. At least 120 children have been killed since Sunday, according to human rights activists. Hospitals overwhelmed by the number of casualties have been targets of the government's bombing. On the fringes of the Security Council, the tensest of negotiations, but always a sense of urgency from the backers of this resolution, and always the unresolved question, would Russia allow it to pass?
I would call upon those who are in favor of the draft resolution to raise their hand.
When it came to a vote, the Russian ambassador held his arm aloft, not to wield a veto, but to finally agree. Yet Western diplomats still attack Moscow for delaying its passage for days.
As they dragged out the negotiation, the bombs from Assad's fighter jets continued to fall. In the 3 days it took us to adopt this resolution, how many mothers lost their kids to the bombing and the shelling?
While we have been arguing over commas, Assad's planes have been killing more civilians in their homes and in their hospitals, imposing unbearable suffering.
The Russian ambassador was pessimistic about the chances of the ceasefire, saying there weren't concrete guarantees from warring parties to abide by it. This resolution brings the hope, at least, that aid convoys will soon be driving through these streets and medical evacuations can finally take place. But even after the Security Council agreed its passage, reports came from eastern Ghouta that government warplanes were continuing their week-long bombardment. Nick Bryant, BBC News, New York.
Nigerian parents who fear their daughters have been abducted by Boko Haram jihadists have released a list of 105 names. Up to now, it had not been clear how many girls were missing following Monday's attack on a boarding school. President Muhammadu Buhari has described it as a national disaster, and he's also promised additional troops and aircraft to help find the girls. With more from Nigeria, Stephanie Hegarty reports.
It's been a week of conflicting lines and confusing information from Nigerian authorities on just how many students were taken from the girls' boarding school in Dapchi town. But parents of the missing girls who formed an advocacy group have released a list of those who are still missing. There are 105 names on the list. Earlier, the state government had claimed that only 51 girls were unaccounted for. Later, they said 84.
Now we have the total number of missing girls that the parents gave us as 105 that have not been found till now. 105. It is their parents that gave us the figures themselves. It is neither the government nor the school teachers that gave us this, but their parents.
Since the girls were taken on Monday night, there's been many conflicting lines from authorities on what exactly happened. It was a full 2 days after the attack that they finally admitted that some girls had been taken.
When we went to check for those missing and present on the day that they wanted to shut down the school, I found out my daughter was among the missing girls when her friend gave me her belongings. Her friends confirmed to me she was among those taken away in a vehicle.
Yesterday, President Muhammadu Buhari said that the kidnapping was a national disaster and that the army was doing everything to find the students. The kidnapping is being compared to the abduction of the Chibok girls in 2014. Over 100 of those girls are still missing. Stephanie Hegarty, BBC News in northeast Nigeria.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the news. Democrats in the U.S. House Intelligence Committee have released a memo that counters Republican claims of bias in the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. The memo dismisses the Republican version of events as a transparent effort to undermine the investigation. The National Rifle Association in the U.S. has accused the growing number of American companies that are cutting their ties with the organization of cowardice. Two U.S. airlines, United and Delta, are the latest to distance themselves from the pro-gun lobby group following last week's school shooting. Also, the American billionaire Warren Buffett says the tax cuts introduced by President Trump his company's earnings by $29 billion last year. Many Democrats had argued that the tax package was a huge and unaffordable giveaway to the wealthy. Mr. Buffett, who is chairman and chief executive of Berkshire Hathaway, has long argued for higher taxes for the rich. Now, he's been called Ecuador's Pablo Escobar, but today, Prado Alava has been extradited to the United States. Colombia accuses him of being one of the region's biggest drug lords. Prosecutors in Washington claim that he smuggled more than 250 tons of cocaine into the United States. Stay with us here on BBC News. Still to come, one of Bollywood's superstar leading ladies, Sridevi, has died. We'll be talking about her rich legacy. 8 days before Italy votes in a general election, thousands of Italians have marched in rival demonstrations focusing on differing views of migration. In recent years, 600,000 migrants, mainly from Africa, have landed on the country's shores. Our Italy correspondent James Reynolds reports from Rome.
These demonstrators have a simple message: we reject fascism. The fact that they feel compelled to say this more than 7 decades after Italy's fascist government fell says a lot about the atmosphere in this country right now.
Our family has told us what it was like. The history of fascism is still close to us. We can't remain indifferent in front of the new fascism of 2017 and 2018.
Above all, in this electoral campaign, hate is increasingly invading our society.
And that hate has turned to violence. At the start of February, a far-right campaigner drove through a central Italian town shooting at migrants from Africa. The gunman ended his assaults by giving a fascist salute. Italy's Prime Minister, Paolo Gentiloni, here at the anti-fascism rally, has said that hate and violence will not divide his country. This has been a dangerous and angry campaign. What's your response? He prefers not to answer. The increase in migration and the response to it have changed life in Italy. They've become the central issues in this election, and both sides in the debate want to get out onto the streets. On Saturday, anti-migration campaigners demonstrated in Milan and scuffled with the police. This movement, increasing in number, is led by the far-right League Party. Its leader, Matteo Salvini, has promised the mass deportation of illegal migrants. Earlier in the week in Rome, I asked him why he thought migrants were so dangerous.
Too many illegal migrants are dangerous for Italy and all over. Think of the foreign fighters that return to Italy from wars in Islamic regions. They are a real danger.
In a week's time, Italy will decide whether or not it agrees with him or with those who believe that this country still has room for new arrivals. James Reynolds, BBC News, Rome.
The head of the International Committee of the Red Cross has said the recent revelations of sexual misconduct by aid agency workers is a watershed moment for the charity sector. Yves Dacor's comments came as he revealed that more than 20 of his staff have been dismissed in the last 3 years for sexual misconduct. Our diplomatic correspondent Caroline Hawley reports.
The Red Cross emblem is seen as a symbol of protection around the world, like here in South Sudan. And most of the time it is. But the ICRC has now revealed behaviour it says was a betrayal of the people it was set up to serve. Since 2015, 21 members of staff either resigned or were dismissed for paying for sex. The head of the ICRC spoke of the silence around sexual misconduct being shattered and called this a watershed moment for the humanitarian sector as a whole. Yesterday, 22 British aid organisations came together to write a joint letter promising to root out staff who've abused their power and saying they were truly sorry. Among them was Oxfam. Revelations about the behaviour of 7 of its workers in Haiti put the whole aid sector under scrutiny. With all aid agencies now under pressure for transparency, Plan International has just confirmed 6 cases of sexual abuse and exploitation of children. Organisations dedicated to saving and improving lives are now also trying to rescue reputations.
It's clear that we have a particular challenge within the charity sector in that some people in some charities have been concerned that if they report this kind of behaviour, it will harm the work that they so passionately believe in. And we've seen from the case of Oxfam that loss of public trust is hugely, hugely damaging.
As aid agencies try to rebuild trust, the government has given them a deadline. 192 British charities working abroad have until Monday to come clean on past allegations of sexual misconduct. They must also show what they're doing now to protect the people they help from future abuse. Caroline Hawley, BBC News.
You're watching BBC News. Our main story this hour. The UN Security Council has unanimously adopted a resolution calling for a 30-day humanitarian ceasefire in Syria. So let's talk about that story a bit more. Dr. Kamran Bokhari is the Director of Strategy and Programs at the Center for Global Policy, and he's also a fellow with the Program on Extremism at the George Washington University Center for Cyber and Homeland Security. Thanks a lot for joining us, Dr. Bokhari. First things first, I've just been looking at some of the comments. The Americans say they're doubtful that the Syrian military will comply. The Russians say they doubt the ceasefire will hold. Syrian activists are saying that the airstrikes continued after the vote. It would appear that clearly the resolution is not even worth the paper that it's written on.
That's one's perspective, and I wouldn't say that it's inaccurate. But I think that the intent of the great powers in the Security Council is to let the world know that, look, this is not easy. We're working on it. This resolution is kind of like a placeholder saying that right now we don't have the means to implement a ceasefire, but we are working on it and, be patient.
So what hope do the people of Eastern Ghouta, for example, have? Is this something which they should hear and feel that relief is at hand?
I mean, relief and a sense of fear are relative, and for the people of Eastern Ghouta, there's been no let-up. So if they're not hopeful, then it's only natural. I think that it'll take a long time for the powers to work out a ceasefire that is meaningful, in which relief can actually be provided to this particular area. And it's a complicated situation. You have the Syrian regime backed by the Iranians and the Russians on one side bombing the area. And then there are, of course, rebel forces that are reportedly not allowing people to leave. I mean, to the extent that these reports can be believed.
So, well, could you just expand on that a bit? Because I'm curious about why it's been so difficult, because clearly if people are suffering to the extent that they are, it should be easy to come to some kind of agreement that lets aid agencies in, for example.
All things being equal, that should be very easy. But dealing with geopolitical interests, Eastern Ghouta is very close to the capital, Damascus, the seat of the Assad regime. And it has its interest in not letting up in terms of its onslaught against the rebels. Likewise, the rebels do not want a situation where they're weakened and they lose this critical space that is so close to the capital. There is no other major rebel, stronghold anywhere near the regime's hub, which is Damascus. So, I mean, these are the interests that are preventing any ceasefire so far. And we may have a ceasefire. The question is, how long will it last? How many people will benefit from it? And, what happens next?
And I suppose, crucially for the people of Eastern Ghouta, this is a chance for them to at least have some temporary relief.
Yes, I mean, it would be a respite. It would be temporary. How many people benefit from it, is anybody's guess, because this place has been bombed for quite some time now, and we don't even know the full scale of carnage and what will it take, what kind of undertaking will be required to provide the people some form of comprehensive respite.
Okay, thank you very much. That's Dr. Kamran Bokhari, who is the Director of Strategy and Programs at the Center for Global Policy, also with the Extremism Program at George Washington University. Scientists in the United States are developing wearable sensors to speed up the recovery of people who've had a stroke. The sensors send information to doctors continuously, allowing them to monitor the effectiveness of their therapies. Now, wearable tech is now being developed by researchers around the world, as our science correspondent Palab Ghosh reports from Austin, Texas.
You can wear skin displays developed by Japanese researchers that show your vital signs. It's to put on patients so that doctors can monitor their progress. The displays are among a new wave of wearable electronics finding medical applications.
And we're going horizontal with this one, correct? Okay.
In the US, Lizzie McAninch had a stroke 2 years ago. She couldn't move or speak or swallow for several weeks.
So that's like
Lizzie is testing out wearable sensors that might speed her recovery. They send information wirelessly to the medical team. She's a doctor and she can see how it could help her.
This technology to be able to put sensors on the body and really assess what muscle groups are working or not can really pinpoint the areas affected by the stroke and target therapies to specifically improve those issues.
The doctors here can continuously monitor Lizzie wherever she goes using these devices. They can follow her muscle activity, her heart rate, even her speech.
May I please have 2 tacos and icy?
Yeah, absolutely.
The idea is that they can closely track whether she's showing signs of improvement.
Do we see that they're walking more at home, or do we see that they're engaging in conversations? Those are the types of things I can get feedback from the sensors, where currently I only have their report.
The challenge for the scientist was to pack a lot of electronics into a small, flexible material.
It was almost mechanically sort of imperceptible to the patient who's wearing the device. And you can embed all sorts of advanced sensor functionality, microprocessor, computing capability, radios, power supplies into this kind of very unusual platform. And that's the uniqueness of what we do.
Thursday, Friday,
By the end of this
Saturday,
year, the team will
Sunday.
have more information than anyone has ever had before about recovery from stroke.
Push all the way up.
They believe that their study could transform the way patients are treated in the future. Palab Ghosh, BBC News, Austin, Texas.
The British actress Emma Chambers has died at the age of 53. She was best known for playing Alice in the long-running BBC comedy The Vicar of Dibley. Lisa Mzimba looks back at her career.
Well, I can't believe the stuff that is not I can't believe it's not butter is not I can't believe it's not butter. And I can't believe that both I can't believe it's not butter and the stuff that I can't believe is not I can't believe it's not butter are both in fact not butter. And I believe they both might be butter.
Emma Chambers' Alice Tinker, a character as humorous as she was naive.
Oh, and this is a nice woman we met on the flight. She was a bit tired when we got to Turkey, so Hugo was ever so sweet and carried her case through customs.
Anna, this is Honey, she's my baby sister.
This is one of those key moments in life.
Just as loved was Honey in hit rom-com Notting Hill. Her co-star Hugh Grant today called her a hilarious and brilliant actress. While Dawn French led the tributes from the Vicar of Dibley cast, saying she'd lost the most loyal and loving friend anyone could wish for. And fans are mourning the woman behind a comedy character who was loved by millions.
Emma Chambers, who's died at the age of 54. A debut feature from Romania has won the prestigious Golden Bear Award at the Berlin Film Festival. Touch Me Not tells the story of an Englishwoman coming to terms with her sexuality. Also celebrating was the American Wes Anderson, who was named Best Director. The BBC's Tim Allman has more.
The Golden Bear for Best Film.
Der Goldene Bär für den besten Film
goes to Touch Me Not by Adina Pintini. Producers Janko Warner, Philippe Abril and Adina Pintini.
You could tell from the look on their they weren't expecting this. A small, low-budget film that has become a big success.
Open your eyes and just look at each other.
Touch Me Not is about intimacy and sex, shocking some viewers with its explicit scenes. Some of the main protagonists were non-actors, including Christian Violin, who is severely disabled. The film's director believes her work has met its moment.
This comes in a very, very necessary, I think, moment when the fear of the other is growing and there is this aggressivity all over the world. So I think it's very important that the amazing people that have been part of this project manage to have this platform to express themselves.
Other winners include French actor Anthony Bajon, who was named Best Actor for his role in The Prayer. He plays a drug addict who tries to kick his habit with the help of religion.
Get out of here and don't come back.
Best Director was Wes Anderson for his animated film Isle of Dogs, although he had to send one of his voice actors to accept on his behalf.
I never thought that I would go to work as a dog and come home with a bear.
Take your time. Much to celebrate for many, but it was the Romanian film about human relations that won the night. Tim Allman, BBC News.
Now, one of Bollywood's greatest leading ladies has died at the age of 54. Sridevi Kapoor, known simply as Sridevi, was at a family wedding in Dubai when she's thought to have suffered a heart attack. She began her career as a child actor and featured in multilingual films in languages including Tamil, Malayalam, Telugu and also Hindi. She made her debut in Bollywood in 1978 and became the leading female star of the 1980s. She appeared in more than 275 films and she won various awards and honours. She's considered one of the very few Indian female superstars capable of huge box office success without the support of a male hero. Well, I'm pleased to say that with me here in the studio are the BBC Asian Network's Raj and Pablo. You guys met and interviewed Sridevi about 6 months ago, but I mean, first things first. This is shocking.
It is absolutely. We were taken aback. We just finished our show, got back, and we were actually talking about Sridevi.
We were talking about her. We were talking about her music and just generally how inspirational she's been to me on a personal level.
And also the fact that she's launching her daughter in films as well. She's also she just made a comeback in Mom last year, and she's making another film as well. And it's just shocking.
It was just, we were kind of like, okay, this has not really happened.
Now, I grew up partly in Nigeria, and in Nigeria, Bollywood is huge. And I was just having a look at Nigerian Twitter, and people are talking about this because she was such a huge star.
I mean, Sridevi started off at the age of 4 as a child artist. She made her debut as a heroine in the age of at 13, and then she made her Bollywood debut with a film called Solva Savan, which flopped, and then she was written off. 4 years later, Himmatwala came, and in the 80s she was
she had Nagina, she had Jalbaz, she had like hit after hit, and she was one of the actresses who kind of, after Meena Kumari, could pave the way for people like Vidya Balan, where, you know, Bollywood accepted the fact that, you know, you didn't need to be with a big hero to make a big hit.
If you think of the golden age of Hollywood, you know, you had Marlene Dietrich, you had Greta Garbo, you had people who could open box office. She was by herself a box office star in such a male-dominated industry and a male-dominated society. She transcended.
And not just Hindi films, all over that. She was doing, what, Tamil, Telugu, it's incredible.
Her 15 years, it was about 4 years ago she made a comeback after 15 years in a film called English Finglish, which is about an Indian housewife who goes to America, doesn't speak a word of English, and then the family gets against her, but she goes to English classes. She was spectacular.
She was great.
Recommend that film.
That film I've seen, and it's a very funny film.
Indeed.
It is hilarious.
But you feel for her in it.
You do feel for her. Something which you mentioned, curiously, Pablo, was you talked about her music as well. So it's not just about film, it's about the music that transcends film.
You know what, I have to say, as a child, as I was growing up, in terms of the liberation she gave, in terms of when she was dancing, in terms of how she transcended any of the playback singers who were singing for her.
I mean, she could be Campus Christmas, don't get me wrong. And then she could be a tragedy, and she could be a hero. She could beat all the villains.
She was always happy.
Yes.
Always happy.
What was she like off screen? Because you guys spoke to her a few times.
She, very many times, both for interviews and, at parties, we hung out and all the rest of it. She was one of the most reserved, reticent Bollywood stars.
Very shy.
Very private.
She was very private. She was never kind of, oh, I'm pushing myself, I'm like this. She was very, always eloquent, very kind of grateful.
And very erudite, very well read as well. I mean, people didn't see, they saw this Chambak Chalo girl, but she wasn't. She was very kind of like quiet, reserved, and very intelligent.
There's one thing I'll never forget. Every time we met her, at the end of every interview, she'd touch her heart and go, thank you, and I'm fine.
You know, the other thing about her which always surprised us, she always asked about our families. She knew, like my nephew, my niece, your family as well. She remembered, and this is a global superstar. We were humbled.
So, in a sense, she cared.
She does. She did. She didn't talk to many people, but when she did, she opened. And one of her closest friends at the moment, well, was Shilpa Shetty, and she's shocked as well. I mean, everybody in the industry shocked. It's like, how? Why? At this young age.
I mean, it's amazing. I was having a look at the tributes, and they're just, it's incredible. I mean, what have people been saying?
I mean, people are just like, I mean, she was in glowing health. I mean, it's a big Bollywood wedding that was happening in Dubai, of all places. She was there. In January, she was at Lakme Fashion Week with her daughter.
Exactly, I was going to say, with her daughter, who she's been promoting, who she's launching in launching in movies, and her husband. But she was at a big Bollywood wedding where all the other Bollywood stars were.
Her husband is Boney Kapoor, who's one of the stalwarts of the industry.
Yeah, he's come from a big Bollywood family.
Big Bollywood. I mean, many of our viewers will know Anil Kapoor from that's her brother-in-law, Slumdog Millionaire. I'm actually in shock at the moment. We're like complete. Our phones have not stopped. People have been messaging.
But
how? Why?
It's kind of like
it's a heart attack.
And when you've spent time with Sridevi, you spent time with Boney, we've kind of hung out with him and all the rest of it and talked, and he's kind of talked about how he is so proud of his wife. Your heart goes out. You kind of think, what must the family be going through?
And then, growing up and watching her, and then watching her on the screen, she just lights up the screen, mesmerising. Do you watch English Finglish? Do you recommend?
Okay. She made so many people so happy.
Rest in peace, Devi. Indeed.
Thank you both coming out. Thank you both very much for coming in. That's Raj and Pablo from BBC Asian Network. You should actually try and catch them because they're a great laugh. Thank you very much. Coming up are the headlines and the travel show, but first the weather with Helen Willits.